Hi, I'm Thalassa. My brother took out a $900,000 loan, using my name. Then he kicked me out of the house I technically owned and said, I don't owe you anything. But the worst part? It wasn't just the loan. It was the years they let me believe I mattered, only to erase me behind closed doors. They used my credit, my silence, and my love, like I'd never notice. How does a family smile at you at breakfast while planning to bury your name under their lies? And why did no one stop him? The day had started with a rare kind of stillness. Late September sun filtered through the blinds in long, slanted lines across the kitchen tile. I sat with a mug of chamomile, reviewing lesson plans on my laptop, the faint hum of the dishwasher murmuring in the background. For a moment, things almost felt normal, like the chaos of the past year had faded enough to let me breathe. Living at Dorian's place wasn't ideal, but after the divorce, it felt safer than being alone in some one-bedroom apartment with paper-thin walls and no sense of connection. He'd offered, of course, said it was the least he could do. Stay as long as you need, he told me, with that big brother tone that always sounded generous to outsiders, but never quite rang true to me. Still, I accepted. At 36, restarting life was easier with a roof over my head, even if it wasn't really mine. The phone rang mid-scroll through a teacher's resource website. Unknown number. I nearly let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Hello, may I speak with Thalassa Han? This is she, I replied, my tone instinctively professional. This is Michael from Liberty First Bank. We're reaching out regarding the mortgage payments scheduled to post next week. I'm sorry? I sat up. I don't have a mortgage. A short pause. Ma'am, the mortgage for the Rancho Cordova property is listed under your name. Loan initiated 4 months ago. Would you like to verify the last 4 digits of your SSN to confirm? He read them out. Every single number was correct. I felt the bottom of my stomach fall away. I never took out a loan, I said slowly. This has to be a mistake. He paused again. Well, we have the full application on file. Signed, dated, notarized. We'll email a copy to you now. I barely remembered ending the call. My tea had gone cold. The dishwasher beeped as if nothing had changed, but everything had. My head swam. I opened my laptop, fumbled for my email. The subject line popped up before I was even ready. Liberty Mortgage. Contract copy. My name stared back at me from the first page. The signature. It looked like mine, but I knew better. I pulled the small box of personal files I'd stashed under the guest bed, old pay stubs, tax returns, a folder labeled divorce, and a bundle of unopened mail I hadn't felt like facing. No mortgage application, no clue, just a tight, rising panic, and the feeling that something very wrong had been building behind my back. I stepped into the family room to clear my head and maybe find Dorian to ask if he'd gotten any weird mail. That's when I noticed the photo wall, a neatly arranged grid of family snapshots, his housewarming party, his son's birthday, even a summer barbecue with some cousins. Not one picture of me. I'd been living here for months. I'd cooked meals, picked Jace up from school once or twice, paid for half the groceries without anyone asking. And yet, it was like I didn't exist. I stood there longer than I meant to, tracing the edges of the frames, looking for my face. I wasn't just forgotten. I'd been edited out. Suddenly, I remembered something Dorian said a while back, in that careless way he often joked when he thought it made him sound clever. We were talking about finances and credit, and he'd said, "You've got the score, sis. Use it while it's good." At the time, I laughed. I always did. I thought he was teasing me for being responsible. But now, my fingers moved faster than my thoughts. I grabbed my phone, opened my banking app, and then pulled up a credit report. I had to know, had to see it for myself. Because if he'd actually done what I was starting to suspect, there it was. Liberty First Mortgage, $902,730, under my name. I tried to carry on like nothing had happened, like I hadn't seen my name on a 6-figure loan I never signed, like I didn't feel my breath catch every time I looked at Dorian. He went about his days with the same swagger, the same casual cheer as always. I noticed how he whistled while making coffee, scrolled his phone during meals, made plans for the weekend like the world hadn't shifted. I watched him through new eyes. No longer just my brother, but possibly the man who'd taken something I could never fully get back. The mornings were the hardest. I'd sit in the kitchen, pretending to look over my substitute teaching apps while my stomach churned. The silence between us didn't come from conflict, it came from knowledge, and I had more of it than he knew. That Thursday, Dorian was upstairs on a call. I was folding towels in the hallway when I heard Jace's voice from his bedroom, giggling through a video chat with a classmate. "Who's that?" the other kid asked, probably pointing at me through the screen. "Oh, that's the cleaning lady," Jace answered innocently. "She doesn't sleep in the big rooms." I froze mid-fold, towel half hanging from my arm. My throat went dry. I stood in that hallway longer than I should have, invisible to the child I once helped with school projects, the boy who called me Aunt T just a year ago. I wasn't mad at him, he only repeated what he'd been told, but the message was loud enough. That evening, I went back to my room, not even mine, just the one with the door I was allowed to close. My suitcase still sat half open in the corner, exactly where I'd left it the day I moved in. I realized I'd never unpacked, never hung clothes, never claimed a drawer. I'd told myself it was because I didn't plan to stay long, but deep down, maybe I already knew. I wasn't meant to belong here. I remembered Dorian handing me the spare key when I first moved in. "Stay as long as you need," he said, tossing it into my palm like it was an afterthought. It had felt generous at the time. Now, it felt like a setup. The next morning, I decided to take a break from the house. I needed air. I walked to the grocery store a few blocks away, one of those neighborhood chains with self-checkout and overpolite greeters. I picked up essentials: eggs, frozen spinach, almond milk, and granola. It wasn't much, but I figured it'd be enough to keep out of the family pantry for a few days. The less I used from Dorian's shelves, the better I felt. At checkout, I inserted my debit card. The screen blinked red. Then came the sound, short, sharp, robotic, declined. "Try again?" the cashier said, already bored. I did. Same result. She raised her eyebrows and asked, louder this time, "Do you have another card?" A small line had formed behind me. A man coughed impatiently. My skin itched with embarrassment. I dug into my purse and pulled out a crumpled $20 and a few singles, barely enough to cover the bill. She took it wordlessly, handed me my change with a look I'd seen before, the kind reserved for people who'd made bad choices. Outside, I sat in the car without starting it. My hands trembled as I searched my phone. "Can a mortgage loan ruin your credit if you didn't open it?" The articles flooded in. Identity theft, family fraud. The more I read, the colder I felt. That night, the dinner table was quiet. Dorian carved into his steak. Irene, his wife, passed the salad. Jace was in his room, probably playing video games. No one asked where I'd been. No one mentioned the mail, the groceries, or why I hadn't joined them at breakfast. I picked at the mashed potatoes, more out of habit than hunger. Dorian looked up at one point and said, "Everything good?" Like nothing in the world was wrong. I nodded. "Fine." I watched him chew. Watched him talk about some new listing he was excited about. Watched the way he avoided eye contact when he mentioned numbers. He was pretending nothing had changed, but I had. Because I finally saw it clearly. This wasn't about generosity. This was control. This was convenience. And I wasn't going to play along anymore. I sat through that dinner like it was a meeting with a stranger I owed nothing to. I finished my food, stood up, and rinsed my plate. And in my head, I made a quiet vow. I won't stay invisible much longer. The next morning, I pulled the storage box from under the bed. It had followed me through 2 apartments, the divorce, and now here, folded letters, tax returns, and a jumble of forms I'd filed away during the years I worked as a teacher. I never thought I'd need to go through them again. But today, my hands moved with purpose. Near the bottom, beneath a school fundraising receipt and an old recommendation letter, I found what I was looking for. A scan of the form Dorian had once asked me to co-sign. "Just an employment thing," he'd said, sliding the paper across the kitchen counter over microwaved lasagna. I remembered the way he smiled, like it was no big deal. I'd trusted him, blindly, stupidly. I held it up to the light. The signature page had a font mismatch. The date didn't sit where it should. I pulled out my phone, logged into my old email account, and searched for the digital copy I'd sent myself back then, one of my few compulsions, backing up everything. When it loaded, I sat completely still. The original had expired 6 months after signing. That was over a year ago. The copy I held now had fresh dates, extended clauses, and language I never remembered approving. Dorian hadn't just reused the form. He'd rebuilt it. There was a name for what I was looking at, and it wasn't family. By mid-afternoon, I couldn't sit in that room any longer. I needed to get out, breathe different air. I texted Kelby, an old colleague from the district, someone who had once invited me to her daughter's birthday party and called me too honest for politics. We met at a cafe near 10th and N Street, the kind that played light jazz no one actually listened to and served drinks in real ceramic mugs. Kelby looked the same, wiry frame, a quick smile, and eyes that always looked like they knew more than she let on. After catching up on the surface-level things, teaching schedules, union drama, I brought up Dorian. Casually, carefully. She stirred her chai. "I remember seeing your name on some lender paperwork years ago. Thought you were a co-borrower." I blinked. "Years ago?" "Yeah, this was before COVID, I think. He used to come into my office a lot. Everyone knew he was trying to get pre-approved, but had awful credit." I nodded slowly, trying not to let my face crack. "I guess I wasn't in the loop." Kelby squinted at me. "You didn't know?" "I do now," I said. Then I smiled, and it was the kind of smile I'd seen my mother wear whenever someone brought up the past. Thin, practiced, just tight enough to say, "We're done here." After we hugged goodbye, I walked slowly back to my car. I didn't remember half the street signs. My feet moved, but my thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The city felt like it had always known, like I'd been the last one to catch up. I sat in the driver's seat with the door still open. I watched a mother pull her toddler into a stroller and wondered how many people lived entire lives being invisible to the people closest to them. It wasn't just the form. It wasn't just the money. It was how easily I had been overwritten, repurposed. I thought about every time Dorian had laughed off his mistakes. How Mom once told me, "Your brother's just trying his best. He doesn't land on his feet like you do." As if my steadiness meant I owed him my spine. That night, I lay in bed with the glow of my phone illuminating the dark. I wasn't looking at social media. I wasn't playing Sudoku. I opened the browser, typed slowly. Legal action against family identity fraud. My finger hovered over the search button. If they could fake my signature, I could reclaim my voice. Dinner that night felt like theater. Everyone knew their roles. The table was set neatly, forks on the left, napkins folded like always. The roast smelled the same, but everything else had changed, at least for me. I'd spent the day printing documents at the local FedEx office, scanning every line again with the kind of clarity only betrayal brings. I kept the pages in a brown folder tucked inside my bag, sitting just beside me on the dining room bench. No one asked about it. Dorian sat across from me, cutting into his chicken with the same practiced calm. Jace mumbled something about school, and Irene offered her usual passive smile. Oswin, my father, took his seat like he hadn't skipped a word since breakfast. I didn't want to explode. I wanted the truth. "Do you remember the employment form I signed for you?" I asked, voice even. Dorian's knife paused mid-cut. He didn't look up. "Why?" "I've been reviewing my credit report." "That form, it wasn't what you said it was." He finally looked at me. Calm. Cold. "Thalassa, You're living under my roof. Maybe show a little more gratitude than questions. I blinked. My pulse thudded, but I didn't flinch. Jace glanced up from his plate, confused. Irene reached for the salt like nothing had happened. Oswin cleared his throat, but said nothing. I wasn't just being ignored. I was being warned. The rest of dinner played out in a strange quiet. Every word sounded distant, as though they were talking around me instead of with me. They laughed about a neighbor's new deck, about Jace's soccer team, but no one circled back to what I'd said. Later, after the dishes were done and the house had settled, Irene knocked softly on my door. I didn't want to open it, but I did. She stepped inside like a counselor, hands clasped, eyes gentle in that practiced way. I know you're upset, she began, but this isn't the way. I crossed my arms. We're family. We keep things internal. You start poking into legal territory, that changes everything. Irene paused. Her voice lowered like we were in a church. Your brother is doing well now. This house, this life, it's stable. Please don't ruin that. You're stronger than this. That word, strong. It always came when someone wanted me to carry something they didn't want to admit was heavy. I didn't respond. I just watched her. She meant every word. She wasn't lying, but she wasn't seeing me either. I waited until she left, then closed the door behind her gently. Not out of respect, just to stay quiet. Back in my room, I pulled out the brown folder. I flipped through the pages again, not to double-check, but to remind myself I wasn't imagining it. They hadn't denied anything. They just told me to shut up. They didn't say I was wrong. They said I was inconvenient. The room was still. Outside, I heard Jace laughing at something on the TV. Dorian's footsteps down the hallway. The hum of the fridge, steady as ever. I sat on the edge of the bed and felt a clarity settle in. If keeping silent kept this version of family intact, maybe it was time that family broke. I opened my laptop, attached the altered form, the mortgage notice, and a short message. Subject: fraud inquiry. Family member, misuse. In the message body, I included only the necessary words. And at the very end, I typed one more sentence before clicking send. I'm done asking. I'm ready to act. The morning after I sent the email, I woke to a buzz on my phone. A text from Dorian lit the screen. You want to make this legal? Good luck. Law doesn't forbid stupidity. I stared at it, letting the words sit in silence. They didn't sting as much as they should have. In fact, there was something almost comical in how predictable it was, how quick he was to defend his lie with insult instead of truth. I didn't respond. I just saved the message, forwarded it to the legal aid clinic, and added it to the folder labeled Case Evidence. In the subject line of the email, I wrote, Ongoing psychological intimidation, family member misusing identity. I knew better than to expect sympathy. But facts, they had a different weight. As I sat in the stillness of the kitchen, the memory of his voice from years ago crept back in. I was 24, had just landed my first teaching job, and Dorian had missed rent again. You're the strong one, he'd said back then. You always figure things out. That line became his get out of responsibility card. Every time he disappointed, every time he took more than he gave, someone, usually Mom, would repeat it like a mantra. Thalassa's strong. She doesn't need help. Just before noon, my phone rang. The caller ID said Magda. I hadn't seen her in years. Mom's older cousin, sharp-tongued and allergic to small talk. I hesitated before answering. Thalassa, she said without greeting. I heard there's trouble. I'm working on it, I replied. Meet me at Lucky's Diner off Sunrise. I'm buying. I didn't argue. The place hadn't changed since I was a teenager. Vinyl booths, clinking silverware, a chalkboard menu that hadn't been updated since the Bush administration. Magda was already seated when I arrived, a black coffee in hand and a folder next to her. You look like hell, she said. Sit down. I did. She studied me for a long second. Your mom called me last week. Tried to dance around it, but I could hear it. Something's off. Then I heard Dorian was throwing around your name in mortgage meetings. I didn't confirm or deny. Just let her speak. You know, she said, leaning in, your mother used to brag about you being so strong. That was her way of justifying why she never checked if you were okay. You weren't a daughter, you were a buffer. I didn't expect the lump in my throat, but there it was. I've got a guy, she continued, sliding a business card across the table. He's semi-retired, did estate fraud cases for 30 years. Not flashy, but he knows how to make paperwork bleed. Tell him I sent you. I picked up the card. Clean design. No logo, just a name and a number. I'm not doing this out of pity, she added. I've just seen enough women in this family get eaten alive by loyalty. I didn't cry, but I felt seen, fully, finally, without having to explain myself. We finished our lunch. She paid in cash and left first, saying she hated long goodbyes. I stayed behind for a few extra minutes, stirring what was left of my tea. When I walked out, the sun hit my face with quiet heat. I wasn't fixed, I wasn't healed, but I had a number in my hand, and someone who finally acknowledged that I had been wronged. That night, I stood in the mirror, whispering words I hadn't allowed myself to say out loud. This house was bought with my credit, my name, my future. The words didn't tremble this time. I wasn't going to be their backup plan anymore. The legal aid office didn't look like much. Gray walls, scuffed floors, chairs lined up like people who'd stopped asking to be seen. I walked in holding a manila folder so tightly the edge had creased into my palm. Inside were months of questions and 3 weeks of evidence. Flash drives, printed statements, copies of documents with my name on them, but not my choices. The receptionist didn't ask what brought me in. She just passed me a clipboard and gestured to the waiting room. The quiet in that space was different than the one at Dorian's house. This was the silence of people preparing for a fight, not avoiding one. A young paralegal named Seth called my name and walked me down a hall. We sat across from each other at a conference table too big for our 2 chairs. I slid the folder toward him, opened to the page with the signature. He leaned in, then frowned. "Do you have any other copies of this form?" he asked, flipping to the next page. "I do," I said. "A digital one I signed last year. I emailed it to myself the same day. This one looks off." He turned to his monitor and motioned for me to plug in the flash drive. A few clicks later, my original document filled the screen beside the altered one. The differences weren't loud, but they were unmistakable. The font spacing, the line alignment, the way the T in thalassa didn't curve naturally in the new one. Mine always had a slight pause. This one flowed too easily. Seth stood up. "I'm going to bring someone in." A few minutes later, an older man in a navy blazer walked in and introduced himself. "Mr. Calder," he said. "I work pro bono through referrals. Magda sent your case." He took one look at the documents and didn't bother to sugarcoat it. "This signature was practiced, not faked in a rush. Someone rehearsed it. The slant is too confident. Yours shows caution. This doesn't." My chest tightened, not from shock, but from validation. It was the first time someone didn't need me to beg them to believe me. He clicked open another file, the full mortgage agreement. "Look here," he said, pointing. "Dorian structured this in your name as the primary borrower. He used your credit entirely. You're the legal homeowner." I blinked. "What?" He nodded. "He listed himself as a secondary occupant. There's no joint title. The bank's internal memo, here, confirms that they only approved the amount based on your FICO. Without it, they'd have rejected the application outright." I sat still. I couldn't decide which part hit harder, the fact that I legally owned a house I was afraid to knock on, or that my name had bought a lie. "With this," Calder said calmly, "you're not just a victim. You're the rightful claimant. You have standing, and frankly, a strong one." The folder felt heavier when I picked it up. We scheduled a formal intake meeting for next week. Calder walked me to the door and gave a small nod before turning away. No pep talk. Just a handoff. Exactly what I needed. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into McKinley Park and sat on a bench near the duck pond, pulled out the printed forms. My name, my debt, my identity. For weeks, I'd felt like I was disappearing, erased from the photo wall, the family dinners, the financial records. But now I realized something. I wasn't gone. I was buried beneath someone else's mess. If I was the one carrying this debt, then I had the right to reclaim what came with it. My name, my standing, my voice. By the time I got back to Dorian's, the sun was starting to set. I parked on the street, not the driveway. Walked up to the door without hesitation. No one saw me come in. I moved past the kitchen, through the hall, and into the guest room I still technically occupied. I didn't say a word. I locked the door behind me, set my bag down, and opened my laptop. Tomorrow, I'd let him know who actually owned this house. By the time I got home from the library that afternoon, the envelope was already sitting on the kitchen counter. I recognized the seal, Liberty First Bank. I paused for a moment, thumb tracing the edge, stomach turning. I opened it slowly, expecting a notice, maybe an update on the dispute. But inside was something else entirely. A thank you letter. Congratulations on maintaining a responsible payment history, on building trust with the institution, on being the kind of homeowner we're proud to work with, and at the bottom, signed in blue ink, Mr. Dorian Halber. My name wasn't mentioned, not once. He'd accepted praise for something I didn't even consent to build. The mortgage, the credit, the payments. It was all mine, but the bank believed he was the one keeping it afloat. He got the applause. I got the debt. I stood there with the letter in my hands, every sentence feeling like a slap. Not because the bank didn't know the truth. How could they? But because he didn't even flinch when they gave him credit for stealing. Later that evening, I stepped out to clear my head and parked in the lot behind the school where I used to substitute. I hadn't returned there in months. I was halfway through scrolling through my inbox when a message from Kelby popped up. The subject line just said, "Not good." I opened it. "Someone from Dorian's office called my HR today," it began. "Said I violated internal policies by discussing client data. I didn't even use my work email when I talked to you, but now I'm flagged for review." A second message came in right after, short, final. "I can't talk to you anymore. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. It wasn't her fault. Dorian wasn't just hiding, he was silencing. One phone call at a time, one quiet threat behind office doors. He knew how to turn the system against people without ever raising his voice. Driving home, I thought about every time I'd watched him lie and watched people believe him. How he'd cry broke one day and host a BBQ the next. How Mom once said, "Your brother's just trying. You're the strong one. You'll understand." That phrase, strong, again, always tossed at me like a consolation prize. I remembered the nights he crashed my couch in college, the excuses about rent, the way he'd borrow my student loan refund and say, "You always land on your feet." He never had to take credit for the damage, just the victory. I wasn't part of his success story. I was the scaffolding he built his image on. No one ever noticed the people holding the spotlight. They only clapped for the guy standing in it. Back in my room, I laid the congratulatory letter next to the mortgage contract. 2 pieces of paper, same lie, different fonts. I snapped a photo of them together. The angle caught both signatures, his praise and my burden, on full display. If he wanted credit, he'd soon get all of it, under oath. The invitation wasn't sent to me, but I heard about the brunch from Aunt Magda, like always. Dorian wanted to show the house, as if it hadn't already been paraded through every conversation since the loan was approved. Family, neighbors, old coworkers, they were all coming for coffee, eggs, and praise. I wasn't on the guest list. That morning, I dressed in a plain navy sweater and black slacks, hair tied back, folder in hand. I didn't knock when I arrived. I opened the door like someone who still had a key. because I did. The moment I stepped in, every fork paused midair. Conversations clipped short. Irene's eyes widened, but her mouth froze in a smile she didn't mean. Dorian, standing in the kitchen near the mimosa pitcher, blinked twice. "Thalassa," he said, steady but tight. "Didn't know you were coming." "I figured since it's my house," I said, setting the manila folder on the counter. "I might as well show up too." No one laughed. I didn't make small talk. I didn't comment on the spread. Avocado toast, bagels, smoked salmon like we were on the coast. Instead, I walked to the living room, turned on the flat screen, and slid in the USB drive. "What's this?" someone asked behind me. No answer. The footage rolled, grainy but clear. Dorian in an office, leaning over a desk, phone pressed to his ear. "Just copy her signature," his voice said, too casual to be innocent. "She won't even notice. I've got a few old forms from when she helped with paperwork. They match close enough." Silence. In the video and the room. Someone gasped. A glass shattered on the floor. I turned, looking not at Dorian, but at the people around him. Faces I'd grown up with. Aunties who used to braid my hair. Uncles who'd once called me the practical one. Cousins who never really knew me, but liked to say they did. Dorian stepped forward, hands out. "Thalassa, we don't need to do this here," Irene interrupted. She marched over and turned off the screen. "We don't air our laundry like this," she snapped. "This is not how we solve things in this family." Oswin spoke from the couch without standing. "You're tearing this family apart. You think a brunch is the place for this?" I looked at them, one by one. None of them said, "That's wrong." No one said, "That wasn't okay." Just discomfort, just decorum. "I'm not breaking anything," I said, my voice calm. "I'm showing what's already been broken." Magda didn't speak, didn't move, just sat in the corner with arms crossed, eyes locked on Dorian like she'd been waiting years for this moment. I placed a copy of the mortgage agreement on the coffee table, right on top of a stack of coasters printed with the word family in cursive script. And then I turned and walked toward the front door. No one followed. No one asked me to stay. Out in the driveway, just as I was opening my car door, I heard soft footsteps. It was my cousin Lila. She touched my elbow gently. "We didn't know it was you," she whispered. "We thought he just used someone." I nodded once. Not in forgiveness, not in understanding. Just a mark of receipt, a message delivered. I didn't reply. Because next time they saw my name, it would be in a courtroom docket. I came back the next morning, not for a confrontation, just for my things. A few jackets, my planner, the small box of receipts and lesson outlines I kept beside the bed. I wasn't ready to see him again, but I wasn't going to let him erase me quietly either. The air was cool as I stepped onto the porch. The front door was already open, but Dorian stepped out as I approached. His tone was loud, calculated. "You've embarrassed us enough. You're not welcome here." I didn't flinch. I reached into my bag, pulled out the folded printout of the deed with my name. I held it up without a word. He slammed the door. I didn't knock again. Minutes later, I sat on the porch steps, scrolling through my phone, waiting for the next move. It came quickly. 2 squad cars pulled up at the curb. Non-emergency line, I guessed. I stood before they stepped out, met them with calm. "Ma'am, we got a call about a possible trespasser." I handed one officer my ID and opened the folder to the mortgage file. "This is my name, my address, my mortgage." He read it over, exchanged a look with his partner, then pulled me a few feet aside. "You can fight this," he said gently, "but not today. He's still listed as the resident. We can't remove him without a formal court order." "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "I'm leaving." I didn't take a single item from the house. I walked down the steps with only my purse and the weight of everything I'd carried for too long. I didn't call anyone. I didn't cry. I walked 4 blocks, turned right past the church, and sat on a bench outside the bus stop. The wind tugged at the hem of my sleeve. My name was on that house. My future had paid for it. But now I was standing on a sidewalk, waiting for a bus like a stranger in my own life. I thought about the term eviction. It wasn't the right word. I hadn't been removed from a home. I'd been denied the illusion that I ever had one to begin with. By late afternoon, I arrived at the women's shelter on 14th, a quiet building tucked between an old library and a bakery. I walked in with my shoulders straight, not proud, not defeated, just moving forward. A staffer named Nia greeted me with kindness that didn't come with pity. She showed me to a modest room, twin bed, small desk, warm light. No questions I didn't want to answer. "You need anything, we're just down the hall," she said before closing the door. I stood there a long moment. Then I sat. Then I laid back. The mattress wasn't soft, but it held me. And for the first time in weeks, I let my body rest, because no one was watching me collapse. The next morning, I woke early. The air outside was crisp, almost brittle. I wore my best slacks, the same gray cardigan from my last full-time job, and took the bus downtown. This time, I walked with purpose into the Sacramento County Clerk's office. I waited in line behind a man filing a building permit and a woman disputing a traffic ticket. When my turn came, I stepped forward, handed over the documents. The clerk glanced over the top sheet. "Notice of motion," she read aloud. "Ownership dispute and identity theft?" "Yes," I said, calm and clear. She stamped the corner and slid it into the intake tray. If he wanted war, I thought as I turned to leave, I'd bring a legal army. The courthouse stood gray and tired against the Sacramento morning. I arrived early, coffee in hand, folder under my arm, and not a trace of makeup. Not because I didn't care, because I didn't want to soften anything. I was here for truth, not sympathy. Mr. Calder waited outside, leaning on the stone banister like he'd done this 1,000 times. "You ready to take your name back?" he asked. I didn't hesitate. I already did. Inside, the courtroom was colder than I remembered from jury duty years ago. The kind of cold that sat between the tiles and climbed into your spine. Dorian sat across from me with a lawyer in a navy suit, too expensive for his income. Irene was behind him, jaw set like stone. Oswin was absent. Cowardice often wore silence best. I didn't glance at them, not once. We began with paperwork. The judge flipped through notarized forms, screenshots of emails, account alerts. Calder spoke calmly, punctuated each document with a story, a timeline, a cost. "She didn't just lose money," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "She lost her signature, her history, her standing." When my turn came, I stood without shaking. Read my statement without skipping. "I didn't agree to this loan. I didn't authorize these papers. My name was used, but not with my consent." Dorian's lawyer objected twice, first on relevance, then on tone. The judge overruled both. When I finished, I sat down and exhaled slowly. Not relief, not triumph, just breath returning to a place it hadn't been welcome in for weeks. At the end of it all, the judge said she'd review the filings, that we'd receive the written decision within 10 days. Outside the courthouse, Irene passed by me without eye contact. Calder didn't follow. He knew I needed the silence more than closure. As she walked away, I heard Oswin's voice, not directed at me, but enough to land. It didn't have to go this far. And I thought to myself, no, it didn't. You just had to tell the truth before it broke everything. Dorian didn't speak. He looked at me once, briefly, and for the first time in my life, he didn't look smug. He looked tired. And small. The following week, I moved into a small one-bedroom near the river. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I painted one wall light green, not because it matched the decor, but because it didn't remind me of anything. I bought a mattress, set up a desk, put my name, T. Han, on the mailbox with a silver label I printed myself. The quiet there was different than the silence I'd lived in before. This one was chosen. I didn't fill the space with noise. I let it hold me. Let it echo back something I hadn't heard in a long time. my own rhythm. One morning, as I was checking mail before heading to the library, I saw the envelope. Sacramento County, official seal. I took it upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and opened it slowly. The ruling was short. The identity theft was confirmed. The mortgage reverted to me entirely. My name cleared. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I folded the paper and slid it into the same folder I carried into court, now thinner but heavier with meaning. It was my debt. But now it was also my name again. The new mailbox came from a small hardware store near the river. Cheap plastic, matte black. But the label I printed for it felt like solid gold. T. Han. Just that. Nothing more, nothing less. As I peeled the backing off the sticker and pressed it onto the metal, I caught my reflection in the door's tiny curve. I didn't look triumphant. I looked settled. A neighbor walked past with her dog and offered a soft, "Morning." I nodded back. For the first time in a long while, I didn't lower my eyes or flinch at casual kindness. I locked the box with its flimsy little key, and even though it probably cost 50 cents to replace, the click echoed louder than Dorian's door ever had. That morning, I woke up not to chaos, not to dread, but to sunlight warming the bedspread. No alarms, no footsteps outside my door. I brewed tea, not out of habit, but because I wanted to. I sat in the armchair by the window and started reading a book that had gathered dust through months of war. Halfway through a chapter, I looked up and whispered aloud. No one told me peace would be this quiet, or this earned. There was no parade for my court victory. No applause. But I didn't need either. I had space. I had silence that didn't punish. A week passed before I checked the old email again. Dorian had written 4 times. "Can we talk?" "You didn't have to go that far. I was just trying to protect the house. I'm still your brother." Each one landed like a dull tap. I didn't open any of them. I read the previews, hovered over the trash icon, and deleted each message with deliberate slowness. Not out of anger, just out of finality. I didn't need his words. I needed him to sit with the silence I'd known too long. On a Tuesday afternoon, I took a walk past the block I once called home. The house looked the same from the outside. Clean lawn, fresh mulch, new curtains in the living room window. Probably picked by Irene. They always had a thing for pattern matching. I didn't slow down. I didn't knock. I just glanced once. And no one came out. No one called after me. That silence used to feel like erasure. But now, it felt like freedom. By the time I returned to my apartment, the sun was beginning to dip, casting a soft orange glow through the blinds. There was a letter on the floor just inside the door. No envelope window, handwritten address. I recognized the clerk's name on the return label from court. It wasn't legal paperwork this time. I opened it with care, unfolded the single sheet. "We don't often see people fight this hard without hatred," it read. "You reminded us why the law exists." I read it twice, then again. I folded it neatly, slid it into the same folder I'd used for every step of this process. Not because I needed to prove anything anymore, but because it mattered to have something that told me I wasn't invisible. I had reclaimed more than a deed. I had reclaimed the right to be. The envelope had no return address, but I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. The loops of the S and the tightness of the L hadn't changed since I was a teenager. She used to write notes for the fridge like that, reminders about dentist appointments, or that leftovers were hers, not to be touched. I didn't open it. I placed it gently in the drawer of my nightstand, the one labeled unfinished. Not because I was waiting for the right moment, but because I'd stopped chasing closure from people who never intended to give it. The days moved forward quietly. I woke early, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Mornings were mine now, my breath, my windows, my time. At the library, I shelved returned books, tucked away dog-eared pages, and helped an elderly man print a photo of his late wife. I didn't mention courtrooms or last names. No one knew what I'd been through, and I didn't feel the need to explain. Later that week, I walked the path through the community ceramics fair. My name was on a simple sign, handmade by T. Han. The booth smelled faintly of clay and warm coffee. On the corner of the table was a single mug, imperfect, off-center, with a slightly crooked handle. I had etched one word across the front: reclaimed. A woman, maybe in her 70s, picked it up and turned it in her hands. "Why this name?" she asked, curious but kind. I smiled. "Because it wasn't supposed to exist, but it does." She nodded slowly, like she understood more than I'd said, and placed a $5 bill on the table. The mug left with her, but I stayed behind a few moments longer, tracing the empty space it had held. That evening, back at my apartment, I found myself scrolling through old texts. The thread with Dorian still sat unopened, buried beneath grocery store coupons and service alerts. No one had followed up. No one had apologized, and I realized I wasn't waiting for them to. Apologies don't rebuild what was broken. Boundaries do. They hadn't rewritten the story. They just stopped sending new lies. And that, in its own way, was permission to move forward. I applied for a small business license online that night, typed out my full legal name, Thalassa E. Han, and didn't hesitate when the form asked for a digital signature. I used a new pen the next morning to sign the printed confirmation. The ink didn't shake. The past still echoed in my credit score, in the glances from relatives at the grocery store, in the letter I never opened. But the echo didn't dictate the terms anymore. It was mine now, softened by distance. I kept the apartment simple. No framed pictures of the family, no extra key under the mat. Just books, pottery, and light green walls that felt nothing like Dorian's kitchen. Some nights, I read out loud just to hear my own voice. I'd say things like, "They used my name like it was free to take." But I took it back, quietly, fully, and without revenge. That silence, they'll never be able to rewrite. And then I'd set the book down, close the blinds, and pour a cup of tea in a mug that said reclaimed. For the first time, my story ends on my terms. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can ever say is nothing. Not every battle needs to be won with shouting. Not every truth needs to be screamed to be heard. I learned that reclaiming your life doesn't always come with applause. It comes with quiet choices, steady boundaries, and the refusal to be erased. If you've ever felt overlooked, used, or told to just be strong, I want you to know, strength doesn't mean silence. And it definitely doesn't mean staying where you're not seen. You have every right to take your name back, your peace back, your future back, even if no one claps when you do. What about you? Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Or had to choose between peace and being accepted? I'd love to hear your story. If this video spoke to your heart, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't connect with you, that's okay too. Let me know why and how I can tell these stories better next time. And hey, if you want more stories like this, stories that dig deep and speak truth, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We've got more coming, and I promise, they'll stay with you long after the screen fades.